Last year, Bill C-311 removed federal restrictions dating back to the Prohibition era that prevented Canadians from moving wine bought for personal consumption from one province to another. It received unanimous support in both the House of Commons and the Senate. The driving force behind this bill was Member of Parliament Dan Albas, who joins me here today to talk about what the bill means for Canadian wine lovers and for wineries and what needs to happen next. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you for having me, Natalie. I'm excited.
Oh, good, great. Well, let's start with the bill itself, Dan. Tell me, or tell us, exactly what Bill C-311 changes versus what we had before.
Sure. Well, the bill now has become law, so that's a great thing for wine lovers across Canada. Bill C-311 was an amendment to a very unknown bill called the Intoxicating Liquors Act. So it made a change to it. And really, it was about 50 words to help free the grapes and allows for people who want to take wine to carry on their person or to have sent to them wine for personal use only. So it's non-commercial. And what this does effectively is allows a small family winery, whether it be in British Columbia, Ontario, or even Nova Scotia, which of course, as you know, is a growing, their wine tourism is growing all the time. It allows for those markets now to send outside of provincial jurisdictions. Now, many people, especially these winery owners, have said, why is it easier for me to send wine from my cellar door to China or to Texas? Why can't I do the same thing to someone on the other end of the country? And that's a great question. And so Bill C-311, that's effectively what it does.
Okay, and so are there any limitations on that? So can I, as a person living in Ontario, call up a BC winery and order, I don't know, half a dozen cases of my favorite wine?
Well, that's a great question, and what we effectively have done is the federal government has created an exemption. So the government is getting out of the way and allowing individuals, as long as it's for non-commercial use, to bring to be able to ship wine. Now that also includes things like hard lemonade or cider. So cider fans, you can get excited here too. But basically, what it does is it allows you to do it, and it is subject though to, if for any province that wants to introduce a restriction to certain quantities, they can do that. Right now, the only province that actually has anything on the books is Alberta, but Nova Scotia is also putting forward legislation that would allow it, as well as British Columbia. They have a policy that says that as long as it's 100% Canadian grapes, you can bring it in. So again, I view Bill C-311 as the beginning of process, not the end, because again, we do know that there is some provincial jurisdiction, but from a federal perspective, we've gotten out of the way.
So you've gotten out of the way, but still, as a person living in Ontario, I can't order those 6 cases from BC because what the Ontario government is limiting me to on an annual basis for personal consumption?
Well, again, this is the core question, is the federal government has said you can, if you introduce statutory laws that say that you are going to limit the quantity, then that's totally appropriate. From my understanding, Ontario through the LCBO has put forward a policy statement that has said that you can bring a certain amount on your person. But again, from a federal perspective, it says you can have it shipped, you can bring or have cause to have brought, is the exact language, wine for personal use. And so as long as you're using it for non-commercial uses, as far as the federal government is concerned, that's a lawful practice. And I think we also need to recognize that many people that I've spoken to they're actually quite surprised that there was ever this law, dating back, as you said, to the Prohibition. So we also have to look at it that if a provincial government was to put forward a statute that said we are going to limit, the other question is, how are they going to enforce it? I think that by allowing these wineries to be able to sell outside provincial boundaries, like for example, right now, a winery in Ontario through the BC government they've already said you can bring wine as long as it's 100% Canadian content. They've already increased their market now, and so what they're hoping for is reciprocal access, so the ability to send it as well.
So
And
from BC to Ontario then, without limitation?
Yeah, without limitation. And again, Ontario has said that that's not something that they're pursuing. However, there is hope. And there's a MPP, his name is Rob Harrigan, I believe, and he has introduced a private member's bill that would harmonize with Bill C-311. Now, with the House being prorogued, with the provincial legislator in Ontario being prorogued, this has kind of moved back. But again, I read the other day that Premier Clark in BC has already sent Premier Designate Kathleen Wynne a complimentary bottle of BC wine and has asked again for the support to have that reciprocal access. So again, from the federal perspective, it's a kosher activity. Again, as I said, it started as a bit of a chicken and the egg situation, because many places, even British Columbia, said until the Importation of Intoxicating Liquors Act is changed, there's no point even having this conversation. Well, it has changed. So now that conversation can happen.
All right, so the restrictions are removed at the federal level, not at the provincial level. We're still limited to how much we can either take back with us or ship directly. Do you think that's going to happen with Ontario? Because as we know, Ontario produces the bulk of Canadian wine, so doesn't the Ontario wine industry have more to lose if they open their borders, so to speak, as much as BC has?
Well, again, you have the same limitations because, for example, most VQA, I think there's about 133 VQA. I believe that number's right in the Niagara area and region, Prince Edward County as well. But they're all competing with each other for the same customer because they're not allowed to sell under the old rules. They weren't allowed to sell outside of their province. So either as a small winery, you either have to build enough production that you can sell through the LCBO or through another provincial liquor monopoly, or you had to sell from your cellar door. And so what Bill C-311 has effectively done is said, listen, there's a whole new market out there for you, and with the internet coupled with the phone, it's look at what you're doing here, Natalie. You're creating a whole sense of new ways to experience Canadian wines via social media. So many of these smaller wineries may have someone who's very entrepreneurial like yourself who wants to advertise their product over the internet very inexpensively. So by allowing access to outside markets outside Ontario, Ontario stands to gain the most because there's such a market for it. Now, that being said, Quebec has a fledgling industry. Nova Scotia has a very ambitious wine industry. And for them, Nova Scotia has some of the lowest consumption rates in Canada. So for them to be able to sell outside of Nova Scotia, what a great opportunity. And again, if you get a beautiful bottle of wine, like we have one right here from my riding of Okanagan Coquihalla, Mission Hill, and most people are very familiar with Mission Hill, they try the wine once and they think, you know what, I'd like to go visit there. And it's not just the winery that benefits from that. It's the airlines, it's the hotels, it's the golf courses, it's the restaurants. So there really is a lot of opportunity if a provincial government was to say, let's open up, let's have free trade within our own country. I know it's a little shocking. Just on that point, imagine if the people from the Maritimes weren't allowed to send lobster to their friends and family across the country. Imagine if Ontario car makers couldn't sell a car outside of Ontario. Ontarians know the benefits of being able to sell their wares outside of the province. So I think what BC is saying is, hey, we can, and Manitoba and Nova Scotia, let's make a bigger game. Let's make it so that Canadian wines are the first choice. And if it's from Niagara, great. If it's from Prince Edward County, great. If it's from the Okanagan or the Fraser Valley, great. But 7 out of every 10 bottles of wine that are consumed in Canada are still foreign wines.
Wow. And
this is not a trend that's changing. About 5 years ago, it was about 50%. So we all know that we make some of the finest wines. But now the goal is, can we make Canadian wine? Can we make that industry better? Can we allow and allow it to grow? And so from the federal government perspective, I was very happy to see not just the support of our government. Now that was key, but also the support from the other parties because
And
they see a bigger role.
right. And why do you think that the provincial government in Ontario wouldn't do this then, other than prohibition, but that's history. And if BC is willing to make the change, then why hasn't Ontario embraced it?
Well, that's a great question. And as from someone who, isn't elected provincially, I would hate to tread in there. But all I can say is that I clearly see that, there's some thinking that says that only the provincial liquor boards, can deliver wine. And in British Columbia, we actually have a hybrid system where half of the stores are privatized, half of the stores are government run, and it's really benefited our wine industry. In fact, I was talking to some wine operators who what they can do is they can actually sell direct to that private operator. That private operator can then market their wines. It's a great showcase for them, and then they don't have to pay those liquor monopoly, some of the marketing fees. So it's a real win-win when we look at things rather than from a close perspective of, are we going to make money in this government pocket to, hey, if we have more people working, if we have people buying, new equipment to make more wine, if we have people investing in new facilities to welcome all of those visitors, if we have people shipping wine, if we have people flying to come and enjoy wine country, whether it be on the east end of the country or the west end, that creates more jobs, that creates more investment, that creates more tax revenue. So it's just I would say a different way of looking at it. I'd like to say it's more enlightened, but then again, I think everyone always thinks that they're more enlightened than some other view.
It's good to keep perspective. And does this Bill C-311, does it also make it easier for me to call an Alberta liquor store and order a case of Tuscan wine?
Yes, from the federal perspective, there is no difference between foreign or domestic. A lot of this has to do with making sure we're trade compliant. The last thing we want to do is cause aggravation from that level. Now, from my understanding, though, for example, British Columbia, and I understand Nova Scotia is following their lead, has said that they will create an exemption policy that is for 100% Canadian content. Now, it's really important just to note here is that my bill only affected and amended the Importation of Intoxicating Liquors Act. It has nothing to do with the Excise Tax Act, which actually regulates, if someone was to ship in foreign wines, they have to pay excise tax. And another point should be made, for those that use blended grapes maybe partly from Canada but mainly from outside of Canada, they too have to pay excise tax. So this bill has no effect on the Excise Act whatsoever. Okay. What it does do, though, is allow, again, provinces to decide if they want to put reasonable limits on it. They certainly can do that, but it really gets the federal government, the chicken and the egg. Again, the Liquor Control Board in my province of British Columbia had said, we have no interest in changing our policies because the Federal Intoxicating Liquors Act is still saying this is a no-no. Right. So again, by opening that up, at least now we can begin that conversation. Yeah. And I know in BC there's modernized wine. And I do know that there's been some talk at the provincial level in Ontario to see some reform. I also knew the new Premier designate has also been sworn. I think she either is about to be sworn in or will include agriculture as part of her role. Okay. And maybe that's a perfect opportunity because ultimately wine is an agricultural product that we all love. And I hope that she chooses to support it.
Absolutely. One last question on this point. I've read that about 90% of BC wine is consumed within the province. So why would BC producers even need to look outside across to Canada? Is this mostly about increasing demand for BC wine so that prices can go up if so much is already being consumed in the province and they really don't have the volume to fill the channel across the country anyway?
That's a great question, and let's just put it. Let's look from a Canadian perspective right now, as Canada competing with other nations. Right now in Australia, one vintage from one company, actually they produce more wine than our entire wine industry in Canada. Mm-hmm. So we're still a fledgling industry. Now we know we can create fine wine. But the question is, how do we grow our ability to produce? And so in British Columbia, there's over 206 wineries, and a lot of them are small family wineries. But remember, every small business starts as a small business with the intention of getting bigger. And so anything we can do, again, going back to that number of 7 out of every 10 bottles of wine that are consumed in Canada are foreign right now, there's a lot of growth. And if we should be trying to put a focus on how we can grow our wine industry. And so I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan. We're going to continue this discussion, and we're actually we're not letting that bottle of BC wine go to waste or get corked or anything, or I should say oxidized. Anyway, we're going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, and then we're going to taste some BC wines together. Thank you.
Great.